Yay! What is up, everyone? Welcome to Ginger Runner Live, episode number 373.
373.
We're excited about tonight's show because we get to talk about a race that happens, well, it hasn't happened in a while, but it happens once a year, and it's basically the Super Bowl of Marathon. We're going to talk about the Boston Marathon with our guest tonight, Jonathan Levitt, who we'll introduce here in just a second, who just ran the Boston Marathon. And we're excited to have Jonathan on. He's a team member at InsideTracker, who we've worked with in the past. They do a lot of blood analysis and that sort of thing, as far as blood tests after training, during training. They help a ton of athletes out. We've worked with them on this show, and we've had tests for them and stuff like that. But this is going to be an interesting perspective in regards to training for a big event like something like Boston, especially after and during the pandemic, and sort of using the science of the body and figuring out how to achieve your goals, set goals, and maybe step back from goals and things like that. We're talking around the Boston Marathon. So it's going to be a good show tonight. I'm excited to welcome Jonathan Levitt here in just a second. Sit back, relax, everyone. Ginger Runner Live begins now.
Ginger Runner.
Yay! What is up, everybody? Welcome to Ginger Runner Live, episode number 373. Thank you for taking some time out of your busy Monday. I was even prepared to say Wednesdays, but I said Monday.
I don't know that. I mean, have we had a Ginger Runner Live on a Wednesday? Tuesdays, yes.
Tuesdays, yes, especially recently.
Yeah.
We've had a lot of international guests, and Tuesdays tend to work much better with schedules. It's
And
been
I
a long
usually
time
just
since
call
we've done a
Wednesdays
Wednesday.
garbage days.
Yeah, Wednesdays are just our garbage days because that's when our garbage pickup is. So thank you for taking time out of your busy Wednesdays to spend a little bit of it with us. We're excited about tonight's show because we get to talk about a race that we love, the Boston Marathon. Fired back up, firing on all cylinders, finally again after a long hiatus this last Monday. We had a number of friends travel out and race the Boston Marathon, including our guest tonight, Jonathan Levitt, who we'll introduce here in just a second, to chat a bit about his experience, his journey in both building up to a goal. He had a stout goal running this marathon, did some incredible training leading up to it, and we're going to talk to him a bit about how that actually executed on the day. And how it worked out, and sort of getting his thoughts on setting these types of goals on big projects like marathons and road marathons. It was his first marathon since 2019, or long road distance of this caliber. And I feel like we'll have a lot to talk about because road races are hard.
They're hard.
I think we don't talk about them enough on this show. We talk a lot about trail and ultras and 100-milers, and we talk about all these long, crazy distances.
Yeah.
But we forget how difficult a marathon can be, a half marathon can be, these shorter, fast road distances. They take a lot out of your body. They hurt. And they take a lot of training too. Before we introduce our guest, of course, it's not just myself. It's not just Jonathan who will introduce. We also have Kim. Hi.
Hi.
How are you?
Good.
Good.
Hi, everyone. Kim Shima Newberry here. As always, if you're new, say hi in the chat room. We have lots of folks in there. Michael from Ireland is joining us tonight. Welcome, Michael. Because we are live. If you have questions for a wonderful guest, Jonathan, please ask them in the chat room.
We love having international guests, and having an earlier start time for this live show each week does bring in our international crowd. We love being able to have that. So welcome.
Also, a number of folks who did also run Boston.
I had a feeling we'd get that. For those of you who did run Boston, feel free to share your experiences and stuff in the chat, and Kim, we can talk about that during the show as well. Before we introduce Jonathan, we do have some individuals we'd like to thank at the beginning of every Ginger Runner Live episode. That is our GR crew, our Ginger Runner crew. Everyone over at patreon.com/the Ginger Runner who supports us, supports the show, our other live shows, our daily live shows, our reviews, our films, everything. It is because of them that we're able to do this full time. So thank you, GR crew. Two individuals in particular at the top tier we like to shout out during Ginger Runner Live episodes. Brian Sands, longtime supporter, truly inspiring individual, training for and executing big races. We had him at our Tiger Claw event last weekend volunteering, and it was just great to see Brian. He's an amazing person. Rick Bjarnason as well. Rick out of British Columbia, Canada, is not only an ultra runner, but a web designer. They redid the gingerrunner.com website, and we're really proud of that. So shout out to both Brian and Rick. We appreciate you both very much. Without further ado, coming to us from, I believe, Colorado. I mean,
it looks like Colorado to me.
Because of the whiteout conditions in the background. Our guest is coming to us from the higher elevations, Jonathan Levitt.
Yay!
Thank you so much for having me on today. Again.
Dude. Yeah, no, it's awesome to have you back. You're in Colorado. You're home now, right?
I am in Boulder, yes.
And this is
Yes, I am back in Boulder.
This is I believe this is the first time having you on the show where Boulder is now your full-time residence, because I think in the last few years you've transitioned from East Coast to the higher elevations. I kind of want to start there because you've had quite the adventure of living in a city that's well known for running, has this history, moving to the higher elevations and mountains and trails. That is also
There's no runners there.
There's no runners in Boulder. What's that like? What's that transition been like?
So I'm closing on a house Friday, so it's like officially official that I'm a Coloradan now. But still definitely splitting time between Boulder and Boston, with the majority of the time being in Boulder. But yeah, to your point, I spent the winter in Breckenridge where I saw maybe 6 people running in 2 months.
Wow.
Like total, not like the same 6 people. It might have been, I don't know. And then I came down to Boulder and it felt like sea level, which was fantastic. And that was definitely the fittest I'd ever been, just from living at 10,000 feet for 2 months. But the experience of being here, firmly here, is so cool. At this point, I have more friends in Boulder than Boston, it seems. And I've just been welcomed into this community here, and it's just incredible. I mean, what I think is so cool about the West or Boulder in particular, Flagstaff, you might say the same thing. Nobody's from here, right? Everybody moves here because they want to be here and they're taking a chance on themselves. And that also likely means they don't have family here. And so community is it's either you have it or you don't. And so people make an effort to be involved in run clubs and groups and teams and things like that. And so I just think it's there's a special kind of person who ups and moves and, does that. And I'm grateful to be a part of that.
I feel like Los Angeles kind of echoes that exact same thing.
Yeah. LA, when we lived there, it's absolute. I mean, yes, there are local Angelinos, but a majority of the people that I would be in communities with were people from out of state, just like myself, right? Because you sort of have this bond of, we're in this new frontier and we sort of have to experience this togetherness. And finding community was one of the best parts about moving to a new city, and most, I want to say most comfortable parts about it. It was the immediacy of oh, now I feel like I found my people, a running community or a comedy community. That was a huge part of being able to adapt to LA lifestyle. So it sounds like that's very similar to moving to the mountain town, moving to Boulder. When you, is your home, did you grow up on the East Coast? Is that sort of, okay. So for you to move to the West, was that a big decision?
So it sort of snowballed, right? Because I spent the winter renting a place in Breckenridge with my roommate from Boston, and 3 weeks into my stay in Breckenridge, in my one-on-one with the CEO of InsideTracker, who I have a biweekly with, he was like, "Why haven't you moved to Colorado yet? You look so happy in your photos that you make me happy." And I said, "Wait, what? I can move to Colorado? I didn't think I could." And he was like, "Funny thing about limits, sometimes they're just totally made up." And I said, "So you're telling me I should move to Colorado?" And he said, "How could I be more clear about what I just said?" and so 3 weeks later, I signed a lease. And so I was already out here, and it wasn't the inertia had already happened. I think the biggest challenge that people have with making any sort of change is taking the first step. Yeah. But the first step had already been taken in a very safe way, in that I had a 2-month rental and I wasn't, I wasn't planning to move. But once I was here with much of my stuff that I needed, and the proxy for getting to Boulder was funny. So originally the plan was to come to go to Breckenridge February, March, and then drive back to the East Coast and continue on with life. hoping that the pandemic had calmed down at that point, which obviously we know it didn't. But we ended up, so we signed up for COVID shots, like on the throwaway list, like, oh, if you have extras, they call you. So middle of March, we get this phone call from Walmart. They're like, hey, if you get here before we go on lunch break, like, we'll give you these shots that are about to expire. So my roommate and I were like, we'll be there now. So we show up, and as a result, our second shot would have been February 18th or 16th, or sorry, mid-April, which was earlier than we would have been eligible for a first shot in Massachusetts.
Oh, yeah.
So that escalated into like, okay, I'll look for a place for April 1 instead of, renting or doing an Airbnb and then coming back and then sort of like figuring it out from there. So it was like really fast tracked. I say like the move to Colorado was a product or like a silver lining from the pandemic, which is horrible. But I think a lot of people have had a lot of like major changes that wouldn't have been possible otherwise. Whether it's moving, whether it's meeting someone, whether it's, all of these things that we've wanted for ourselves, but needed some like major disruption to cause for it. I benefit from that, and I'm incredibly grateful for the ability to have made that change.
Yeah, we've definitely seen and feel it ourselves that it's really sort of forced us to distill down what matters to us most. And
sure, exactly.
Friends, family, community, location. I mean, I think we take environment and location for granted a lot of the time. Like whether you live in a big city, whether you live in a small community, whether you live in the mountains or on a coastal city or in the plains. I feel like an environment that provides you with fulfillment has been a huge part of our journey as well. We wanted to be closer to trails and trees and that sort of thing. In Los Angeles, we didn't necessarily have that, but being back up in the Northwest, we definitely feel that deeper draw in the last year and a half, especially what matters most to us. So I love conversations like this where you talk to someone who finds what they want and makes that step. Because I agree with you. The hardest step is the first one. It's everything after that is sort of like, oh, this makes sense now. This path was
snowball.
It's a
Inertia.
snowball. Absolutely. I am curious how sort of transitioning that training in Colorado obviously is very different than training on a coastal lower elevation location. Boulder seems to be a happy medium between Breck and sea level, but it's still breathtaking. How was that transition? How long did it take you to sort of amp up your training, get that base back? And were you able to do it comfortably during a pandemic? Like, did you feel like your body was ready to bring on these miles as you trained for a race like Boston?
Yes. So it was really interesting. So before I went to Breck, I was doing like 55 miles a week in base training, and my like normal peak weeks would be like 65 to 75. And I would touch that like while marathon training or while 50K training. In Breckenridge, I was down to 35-mile weeks, and I came out of that the fittest I'd ever been, like objectively and subjectively, like not a doubt in my mind. I did a blood test when I was in Breck after 7 weeks, and my values were so high that David said to me, like, dude, between you and me, like, are you taking anything? And so I guess I'm just a high responder to altitude, pun intended. But I really, like, it took a long time to get that mileage back. And I was doing a lot of cross training, like in Breck, I was skiing and that kind of stuff, cross country skiing. And then I came back to Colorado for 6 weeks, and then I went back to Boston for 6 weeks, and then I came back to Colorado. And this summer I was up to like 50s were common, and I dropped a 6th day of running. So I was doing 5 days of running and a cross train day and an off day, whereas in Boston I was doing 6 and a day off. And so it didn't the mileage didn't really pick back up. Like I didn't hit high 50s or mid 60s until like peak marathon training in September. And what I found to be interesting was 65 miles felt like 75 miles, or 62 miles felt like 75 miles. So my peak in Colorado felt like my peak at sea level, but there was a delta of like 12 or 13 miles. And that's the point, like, right? You find your threshold and you hover there and you recover, and you don't want to go too far, and all that stuff. But yeah, it was a long, slow build, and we also experimented with training in ways that I'd never done before. Like leading up to Boston, my goal was always run Boston, race CIM. And I thought that I was going to run Boston with Shalane Flanagan in her quest for a bunch of sub-3 marathons. Well, her sub-3 marathons turned into sub-250 marathons and 240 marathons. And I didn't have that kind of speed. And so I had been preparing to like run a 257 or so with her. She ran 246 at Boston after running 240 at Chicago. So I reassessed my own goals and just went out to have some fun, and thought I'd be running around a 310, and I split a 135 first half, and then finished nowhere near 310 because Boston is Boston and it doesn't really care what you think. Which is true with the marathon in general, right? Like,
Yeah.
I've gotten to know Peter Bromka well, and he's got a line: the marathon doesn't owe you anything. I think that a lot of people, if you train for something, you will get what you expect, and it's not true. If you train for something and you put in the right work, like, you're in a position to have a good day, but you need the stars aligned to also have a good day. But you can't have that good day without putting in the work. But putting in the work doesn't guarantee a good day. So it's like this like fickle relationship we have with race day, where if you look at race day as a test, you're going to fail 9 times out of 10. If you look at race day as a celebration, you'll succeed every single time, right? Like, I posted something on Instagram the other day reflecting on Boston, and I think what I said was something along the lines of like, when it got hard, I reminded myself that it's supposed to be hard. Even if I was running easy, like, it's still a marathon. It's still hard. It's still a lot of road miles. And to just lean into the discomfort, but also lean into the fun, right? I love the Boston Marathon. There are like few people that I think love the Boston Marathon more than me. I think Peter Bromka is one of them. And I vividly remember being at like mile 12 and thinking like, I'm not going to finish this, but thinking what's ahead of me and how much I love like 18 through 26. And like, those are my favorite race miles of any race ever, between the start of the Newton Hills and Brookline and Beacon Street and Kenmore Square, and the turn, onto Hereford, and the left turn onto Boylston, and just being dumped out into this big road with big buildings and screaming drunk people. And there was almost nothing that was going to take that away from me. And I wanted to puke. My stomach was a problem. I also learned, so like mile 14, 15, my stomach had like been pretty annoyed with me, and I started asking people for Imodium in med tents. And first of all, I learned that the med tents at Boston don't have medicine. And so I said, in the race, I was like, why is it called a med tent if you don't have medicine? It's literally in the name. And they're like, I don't know, dude. Can't tell you that. Do you need an IV? I was like, no, I need Imodium. I didn't need Imodium. I needed Tums. So
An antacid.
Here I am telling these people that I've got like raging diarrhea.
There's 50 people that are out there right now that are like, I was one of those medics. This guy came in asking for like
he just was like dying for ammonia,
but he was so animate about why did we not have that for him. That sucks, man.
But the crazy part was how stoic they all were in their response. And like, imagine a runner running into a med tent, like basically volunteering that like your insides are coming out, and you just have no emotion when you reply. And so at mile 15, they told me we don't have anything, and none of the med tents do. And I said, it's going to be a really shitty next 11 miles. And I didn't realize that until just now, like how ridiculous that statement must have sounded, knowing that I asked for Imodium, not Tums. Anyway.
I actually don't know how. I don't think it's that ridiculous. I think
it's like the perfect response.
Perfect response. You made so many people's day.
Yeah.
But they also probably feel terrible that you literally are going to have a shitty next few miles. I hope that they are watching so they know that you are fine. You made it. You got what you needed.
Yeah, and I forget where I was going with this tangent, but
some of your favorite miles.
Yeah.
Towards the end.
So some of my favorite miles are after the start of the Newton Hills, and what I found to be like really, really motivating was having somebody to look forward to seeing at every single mile after mile 17. I just started dating someone. I knew she was at mile 20, and I was like, get to Kate. Like, if you get, like, you got to do that. And I knew once I got to her, I could get to the finish line. And it started at 17. And so I saw friends at 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24, and 26, and 25. Actually, not at 25. And it's just so wild what the mind can do when you're physically like wrecked. And I've run Boston 3 times. I've had 2 days like today or like Monday, and one incredible day time wise, or like physically it was incredible. The other 2 were physically terrible, but it's so crazy how, first of all, we choose to do this, right?
Yeah.
Like we choose to subject ourselves to immense physical discomfort. We can stop at any time. This is not a trail race. You don't have to like find your way off the mountain. Once you're like 15 miles into Boston, it's pretty easy to get back to the start or to wherever you need to go. I live at mile 24. I could have stopped there and gone home and taken a shower from the course. But I chose to keep running another 2 miles. Why do we do that? I started a podcast to understand that question because I love it so much. But a shameless plug for the long run. But I think that those moments are when you find out a lot. This is so cliche, but those moments are when you find out a lot about yourself. Like, I honestly didn't think I was going to finish yesterday, but thinking about how people would kill to be in that position and to be able to put themselves to that test and get dumped out in the middle of Kenmore Square and scream your heart out and finish the race with a sore rotator cuff because you high-fived so many people. Like, I live for that stuff. And there was nothing that was going to take that away from me. And I just needed to remind myself over and over again that, like, think of the last 5 miles. Think of the last 10K. Like, this is what you think about frequently. And it was really cool, like, what the mind could do when the legs had other thoughts. And the lungs.
No, yeah. When everything sort of is going the other direction and you mentally are like, I need to go this direction, it is sort of that whole story. I'm finding so many obvious comparisons to ultra, and you've obviously experienced the ultra distances and you know what this is like. And even at a marathon, you can experience these lows. And having to convince yourself to continue to move forward and finding that drive. Sometimes you have to dig really deep to find it. Like sometimes you really have to keep burrowing down to find that one little piece of light. For you, it sounds like having that friend at mile 17, 18, having Kate at mile 20, like having just that little bit of gold, I guess, that you can sort of chase is enough to get you to that next point. I like the whole time you were explaining that, I kept thinking about the New York Marathon that I ran. We just talked
We
about this
just
the other
talked
day.
about this, I think, yesterday on Daily Brew as well. So you were just mentioning how like easy it would be just to walk off the Boston course. Like it's not like an ultra. You can just quit if you want.
Yeah.
We just had the discussion yesterday, I believe, about New York Marathon on one of your dark marathons.
I ran
that
New
you
York twice. I ran the second time. It was a month or two after I'd run my first 100, and I was like, man, I just ran 100 miles. A marathon? It's fucking easy. Like let's just go jog this out. I bonked at mile 3 because my whole endocrine system was just like, what are you doing? You're done. Like you're done for months. So at mile 3, I'm going over the Verrazano Bridge. And I'm just going, oh no, this is not a good day. This is bad. And you know,
I think you phoned me at like mile 3 and you're like, I'm bonking. And
I'm like, I'm done. I'm
fine.
bonking. What do I do? And you're like, I don't know what you do.
First gel.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, let's do that. But what I realized at that race, and I'm curious if this is the same at Boston. It sounds like it's not for you, but for maybe a typical runner who's traveling there, I didn't know what to do at New York because there's so many fans and spectators that like if I wanted to quit, how do I get off the course? Because there's just so many. Like, what do I do? Because if I try to get through the crowds are gonna be like, "What are you doing?" Like they're gonna swear at me and cuss at me. Like, you gotta get back out there. They won't let you.
They won't let you stop. And when you start walking, they won't let you stop. And then then you start running, and then they cheer for you. And it's like this vicious cycle of that. But at Boston, it actually is very difficult to get back to the city before 12 or so. I mean, it's like it's a 45-minute bus ride to get out there, and you go on the Mass Pike, and you're going 65 miles an hour for 30 minutes, which is pretty intimidating. And I make a joke every time I run Boston, like, "Wow, we're still on this bus, huh?"
Yeah.
But I mean, my comparison is I sprained my ankle in a 50K at North Face, California, at mile 14, and I DNF'd at 18 and a half on a sprained ankle, and I could barely walk, and like putting weight on my foot was excruciatingly painful, and I wanted to stop, but like you're on a mountain, you can't just like pull over and take the commuter rail back into town. Yeah.
I'm just getting all these stories flooding back. So I appreciate you sort of telling us a bit about your experience, because it does bring up a lot of just similarities, and we can dive into exactly like how you managed to find that voice inside and that sort of thing here in just a second. But I do want to point out we are live with Jonathan Levitt. We have a bunch of questions here in the chat. Kim, I'll let you get to some of the live questions.
Yeah. First question is from Brian, and Brian asks, Jonathan, what advice do you have for people who struggle / are skeptical with data-driven approaches to running? With InsideTracker, how can people engage it without adding to the overall stress?
Yeah, I love this question, right? I think that there's so much noise out there with wearables and with all sorts of tracking, right? It comes down to what do you do with the data? And so our mission is to translate it into action. So we basically tell you, keep doing what you're doing, but add this food twice a week, add this food once a day, and take a supplement in this dosage. Here are 3 brands we recommend based on quality. So it's less about like being obsessive around like blood metrics and more about like, I know that I need to take ALA and ashwagandha and eat oatmeal daily and eat fish twice a week or 3 times a week. And like those are the tangible things that I need to do. So it's less about data in that regard and more about driving different behavior changes to influence outcomes. Great question.
Yeah, practical changes. And that was our experience with our first round of testing with InsideTracker. Was just, it wasn't like, it was more about, here are some practical things you can do to get these numbers on the right place. I had a number.
And all very simple things just to add into your day or week.
Yeah, that was sort of the thing I was surprised about, is like, oh great, I just need to take more vitamin D or iron supplement or something that is so common and easy to just incorporate. Want to get to one more live question, then we'll start digging into goals versus results.
Sure. Yep. Question from Jessica. Jessica asks, Jonathan, Boston is known as a hilly course. How did your training differ in Boulder compared to the East Coast? Did it include more vert?
Yes. I was running like as much vert in a week as I was running in like months in Boston. But the interesting thing about hills in Boulder or Colorado is that they're so much harder than anywhere else. So in Breck, I was doing hill repeats that would crest at 10,000 feet. And David Roche was my coach as well. And he gave me there was one that was a 1, 2, 3, 2, 1 ladder minutes with like a jog down recovery. And I ran out of turnover on the 2 minute rep. And I was like, oh God, what's going to happen on the third one? And it like you're like tasting pennies because you're so high and you're working so hard. And it's just like, it's so hard. He gave me a 5 by 3 minute hill workout, which is generally one of the hardest workouts that he gives. The prior week or 2 weeks prior, I did 6 by 2 minutes and then 5 by 3 as the like big boy workout. And I felt so strong on that. And these are like fundamental strength workouts that are just really hard. And when you do them, you're like a 3 minute hill is enough time to feel good for 15 seconds and bad for the entire duration of it. But then it's over and then you do it again. And so I think that kind of stuff is like really character building in the obviously it has great physiological benefits, and he gave me a couple of these to like jumpstart the adaptations to altitude and this and that. But um, the point of suffering hard for short periods of time, resting and then doing it again, is that like these reps don't last forever, but in the moment they feel like they last forever. So your tolerance for discomfort is extended. And so, very long-winded answer to your question, Jessica, of yes, there was a lot more vert. I spent a lot of time in the mountains in the summer, and my quads are pretty thrashed yesterday and this morning, but it's Wednesday afternoon and I'm in a 3-bed or 3-story townhouse, and I've like gone up and down the stairs a bunch of times today and I already feel like pretty decent. So I think that like while Boston is known for a pretty punishing start and finish because of the downhill start, I feel decent otherwise.
Those hill workouts, we know them all too well. I think the 6 by 2 hills and the 5 by 3 hills are before you, like for me personally, before I do them, I'm like, oh man, I'm actually pretty excited about this. Like I'm excited to just like rage on the mountain for a second. And then probably about the second one, I'm just like, I picked a bad hill, or I'm having a bad day, or this sucks terribly. I hate David, like whatever it is. And then you get done with it and you're tasting all the things in your mouth. Like, what the fuck is that? But then later that afternoon, you're like, that felt great. What an awesome workout. So I feel you.
Yeah.
I do want to talk a bit about goal setting, because this race for you particularly, Boston, as you mentioned there in the pre-show, this was your first road race of this distance in a number of years. So you set some goals and you made those goals public, and I really admire that. I'm really curious what goes through your mind as someone who sets a really great goal, and you talked about wanting to run with Shalane and being able to keep up with her and that sort of thing. And as your race sort of begins to change, how do you manage mentally that balance between, I had a goal, I put that goal out there, and here I am not achieving that? How do you adjust on the fly? Because this is a mindset that so many of us will have to come to grips with.
Yeah, I think I'm so public with everything I do, and I couldn't imagine hiding a goal. But the downside of that is I've put myself out there so many times and come up short. I've only had one well-executed marathon. I run 7. I've had one well-executed marathon where everything went right and I achieved my goal, my time goal. And that was Providence 2019, which is the last marathon I ran. My goal was sub 3. I ran 2:59, and I started that race running effortlessly at 6:40 pace. And I was like, I don't know what this is. I don't know what's happening, but I like this, and let's see where it goes. And I had the same thing happen on Monday where I started at 650 and it felt effortless. That was because I was running downhill. Um, but it's hard, right? Because part of it is the accountability of putting a goal out there and like challenging other people to put goals out there and
Yeah.
dream bigger and all this and all that. But then there's a bit of the imposter syndrome for me because I've never been a runner until, I don't know, 5-6 years ago. And I've only just started taking it seriously like 3 years ago, when I started working with a coach, 4 or 5 years ago when I started working with a coach, and 3 years ago with David. Um, and I say that because I have come up short most times I've put a goal out there, and the internet is a pretty vicious place for a lot of my friends, and I'm just like waiting for that to happen to me because I don't get a lot of I don't get a lot of criticism, and I think that there's a little bit of male privilege in that. I know that there is, but I honestly can't believe it hasn't happened yet for the amount of times I've come up short on a time thing. Like this past May, I anticipated breaking 80 minutes in the half marathon, and I didn't. I PR'd. I ran 85 minutes, but I ran. My first mile was a 6 flat, and that was my fastest mile, and it was the easiest 6-minute mile I've ever run. But I thought I was going to run about 13 of them, and I ran one of them. And then I ran Falmouth Road Race. Same thing. I was like, I'm gonna go out at low sixes and take it into the fives from there. And my first mile was a 6, and that was my fastest mile. And so I keep doing this, and I keep like putting myself out there. And I've talked to David a bit about this, and part of it is I think I underestimate my capabilities in one regard and overestimate my capabilities in another. And I don't know which combination is which. I don't know if I'm overthinking I am overthinking. I don't know if I'm overestimating my physical or my mental abilities. I'm definitely underestimating my mental abilities because I think that that's a place that I really need to work on. Confidence when things get hard. I think I suck at that. And I don't know what I haven't figured out how to remain in that discomfort and let it get harder. And Providence confuses me, that marathon I ran in 2019, because I did that. I ran, my first half was a 128, and I don't like using numbers because it's so relative to your own skills, but I use them to compare and like tell the story of, like, to put context to it. So my PR at the time was a 320, and my half PR was a 127 mid or something like that. So I ran a 128 as my first half in that race. And around mile 17 or 18, I started to fade. And at mile 20, I did a little mental math, and I was like, if I keep below 7-minute miles from here on out, I'll run sub 3. And I did that. And so David said I was following along, and your splits got better after you hit the wall. That never happens. And I can't figure out how I did that. And it's like troubled me because that's like, if I can unlock that, I can unlock anything. And I haven't been able to do that despite my training indicating I'm capable of so much more than what I'm executing on, which then leads into your part B of your question of what happens when you're going to come up, when you're going to come up short. Once once things start slowing and your body is telling you, not today, dude, you have to reassess. And you can't just say, oh, I'm going to push through. Or maybe you can. Maybe some people can. I don't know. I haven't figured out how to do that yet. And I think that's a weakness. I know it's a weakness, and it's something I need to work on. But in that moment, I remember I was running through Wellesley, and I was coming up on the 130. No, it couldn't have been Wellesley. I was Yeah, it was Wellesley. Mile 15, 16, and things had started to slow. I was seeing 8s. I took a minute visit into the med tent where they don't have medicine. And I was like, nope, we're not running 3:10 today. And it'd be really nice to, run 3:20 or whatever. And so I had to like shift away from thinking about time and thinking about how can I enjoy the rest of this race as much as I possibly can and have no regrets. And I won. I did that. I am through the moon proud of how I refocused my perspective. I love the Boston Marathon so much. I'm like I draw so much energy from people. And like I said, I finished the race with a sore rotator cuff from high-fiving people. I was getting pushed around like I would high five someone. I'd put my hand out for a high five, and they'd hit it so hard that I'd stumble, and that happened for a 10K. And I loved every minute of it. I would scream at the crowd. I would do the pump your arms, that kind of thing, and then I'd get winded and I'd walk, and I'd walk for 15 seconds, and then I'd run. And then I'd scream at the crowd and raise my arms, and then I'd get winded, and then I'd walk. And I basically did that for 5 miles. And all I could think about was getting dumped out into Kenmore Square. I love this spot of the race because you've been in like a narrow 2-lane road, and then all of a sudden you're in like a 14-way intersection.
Right.
And it might actually be 14 ways. Anyway, and usually there's a Red Sox game that has just let out, and usually everybody around you is like wasted and screaming, and there wasn't a Red Sox game until that evening, but the place was packed. So I get into Kenmore Square, and I'm just like thriving and screaming and screaming. And then you hit 1 mile left, and I told myself, don't walk in this last mile and get to Boylston. And once I got to Boylston Street, I was like, oh my God, I am so happy and proud of myself for getting here. Enjoy the next quarter mile because you don't know when you're going to be back here. And you don't know. It's such a privilege to run Boston, right?
Right.
You could run really great marathons and never run the Boston Marathon simply because it's really hard to get in. Like, I'm 31 years old, and I can't confidently say I'll get into the Boston Marathon until I can run a 2:52 marathon. And that's hard. And so in that moment, I was like, I honestly don't know when I will get to do this again. I will get to do it again, but I don't know when. So enjoy the shit out of this moment. And there was a dude in front of me who was just like weaving all over the road and screaming and hyping up the crowd. And I was like, and I caught up to him. I was like, let's make some fucking noise. And I started like taking my hand to my ear and telling the crowd I couldn't hear them, and they were just going nuts. And it was like, this is my like favorite part of running, like the crowd support. And when I said like I couldn't have done it without the crowds, like I would not have done it without the crowds. It's not just I could not have done it without the crowds. I wouldn't have. So it's really cool to be in a race where, and I didn't understand what that meant until the first time that Boston got hard for me, and I like drew energy from the crowds and this and that. But it's really incredible and very long-winded answer to your question.
Well, what I love about it, Jonathan, is one, you can tell stories all day. Like, I love listening to your stories, and especially stories from Boston and from marathons and from just community, right? From like knowing that this race was able to take place this last weekend, and people were able to have their Boston experience and their marathon experience. But what I like about your answer is is something that's sort of particular in a mindset that you might not give yourself credit for, and that's being able to reframe your original intention. So if you approached Boston with the goal of not just running with Shalane, but having a specific time in mind, and you put that out there, and you put yourself out there with other races in the past, like, hey, I'm going to shoot for this time, and I'm so excited, training's going well, whatever. But when things don't go that way, in real time, you just described the ability to reframe your day from rather than being disappointed in your inability to reach that time on that day, because again, the marathon owes you nothing. The marathon is a fickle beast, and like, you're asking a lot for months for your body to be particularly astute on one day for 3 hours. You know, that's a huge ask. So when things start going a little haywire, I would say that's a 99% probability of happening. But being able to reframe that day into a positive light and looking at it as, I get to run the fucking Boston Marathon, or I get to be out here, I get to high five people, I get to hurt my rotator cuff, I get to run with that guy cheering people on, I get to put my fingers to my ear and hear the crowd go nuts. Like, that's a reframing in a different way that is a skill. So, you know, if you're talking about things that you're not good at when it comes to the mental, like, oh, I got to push through these things, I think you just described that you did, and you just did it in a really, really positive way. Ingen mentioned your recent post. I forget if Ingen mentioned that it was on Instagram or not, but she said that you PR'd in fun. Your quote was that you PR'd in fun. And I love that. Because let's be honest, like, I haven't run many road marathons since my last one in, I don't even remember. Years ago. There's multiple reasons that I sort of just ventured all in on trail. But one thing that I really miss is that sense of like noise and energy that you get at the finish line of these things. I can only imagine what it's like at Boston. So well done, man. Well done. Like, being able to reframe and turn that day from what was probably, damn, this sucks, like, ugh, my time is now 5 minutes slower, now it's 20 minutes slower, whatever it is, into something like, holy crap, I just finished and ran the Boston Marathon. How cool is that? And now your day's removed. Being able to walk up and down your 3 flights of stairs, no big deal. I am curious with the science side of things, because you have this direct connection with InsideTracker and to science. What is your post-race schedule like when it comes to blood draw, and how do you analyze your results, and like, how are you going to come at this from a scientific perspective?
Yeah. So first, I appreciate that feedback. I think I don't give myself enough credit for some things, and I like think too negatively about the piece that, like, where things went wrong versus what happened next, as we all do. So I always, to answer your question, I always test 3 days post race. I've done this since Philly 2016. I actually did it in Boston 2015. Anyway, I have like 3 or 4 data points of marathons 72 hours later, as well as rim to rim to rim 72 hours later, which was 4 times worse than any other marathon from an inflammation standpoint, which is fascinating. Mm-hmm. I use this as a way to understand the cost of that race and the magnitude of impact. So Providence, I was almost fine, like physiologically and biochemically, like not much damage was done. And I ran 4 days later and felt fantastic. Boston 2017, I tested 3 days post, and my testosterone had gone down almost 700 points in a 4-week period. Most people don't have 700 points of testosterone to lose. 700 is like the middle of the optimal zone for many people. So it would give a lot of people negative testosterone. This is a way to say that it helps to understand where you've started and where you go. Baseline follow-up. So have something to compare it to. So I don't recommend your first test being 3 days post-marathon, because things are going to look pretty weird. But if you've done a test in a more baseline period, you can understand that. So for me, I use this as a way to understand, like, how should I think about the next 2, 4, 6 weeks? And what are the foods that are going to be most impactful for me? Is it inflammation that's really high? So I should, eat Brazil nuts because they're the best source of selenium that helps with inflammation and blah, blah, blah. is it cortisol? So I should be taking my ashwagandha and making sure I sleep enough and minimize stressors and other things like buying a house the week you run a marathon. Is it liver enzymes? So, there are a number of different things that can be influenced by an acute event. And so I use that test as a way to understand, like, how do I most efficiently recover from a marathon? So we have a couple of blogs over on InsideTracker. One we did with Mario Fraioli, I believe in 2019, where he talked about how he uses blood testing post-race. And then I just contributed to one that we shared recently, where I talked a lot more about how I've used blood testing post-race, or how I've used InsideTracker analytics post-race, as well as like what I've learned.
Yeah. That's excellent. I can imagine having the multitude of data points from years previous is super, super helpful in at least being able to look at past data, how your body is different this day and age. We are going to wrap up our main show there. We are going to move into our after show with our guest, Jonathan Levitt. But of course, before we do, Jonathan, I do want to mention that you are the host of an amazing podcast called For the Long Run Podcast. And I want to give you an opportunity to sort of plug where people can find you, where people can listen to you, where people can follow along with your adventures and journeys as they continue to unfold. So, Jonathan, where can people find you, listen, all that good stuff?
Thank you so much. They can find me in Boulder, Colorado. If you're out here, please suggest a run. I'm JW Levitt on Instagram and Twitter. It's mostly running, dogs, and food on both platforms. And then the podcast is For the Long Run. It's For the LR Pod on social. That podcast is aimed at exploring the why, understanding what keeps runners running long, strong, and motivated, and like how and why do we do what we do, and what can we learn from objectively successful athletes for tangible takeaways.
I highly encourage those of you who are watching or listening right now to go check out his podcast. It's great, great guests, great content. Quite often, it's always a really fun listen. Our guest tonight, Jonathan Levitt, at JL or just at J Levitt, right? Is that what you said? JW Levitt.
You'll get there.
I'll get there eventually. I always forget letters here and there. But it's such an honor to talk to Jonathan tonight, talk a little bit about Boston, about his training leading up to it, his life now in Boulder, Colorado. But we are going to talk to him a little bit longer in our after show, and you can join that simply by going to patreon.com/thegingerrunner. That's it. All tier get access to our after shows. Before we wrap up this main show, though, we do have a segment at the end of our episodes that we like to call our GR crew member of the week, where we get to recognize members of the community who go above and beyond. And Kim, who is this week's GR crew member?
There's a lot of really good stuff happening in the GR crew over the last 7 days.
Yeah, it's been nuts.
I've been very impressed with a lot of people. This week's GR crew member of the week is the one and only Crispin Flowerday.
Yes.
Crispin ran London and then ran Boston. With a very
7 days apart,
8 days apart, with a very consistent time of 2:47 and some change, running Boston. I believe it was 4 seconds faster than London.
Yeah, 2:47.13 and 2:47.9. Being that consistent across an 8-week period and two marathons with the travel and the time diff. Come on. Well done, Crispin.
Congratulations, Crispin.
That's going to wrap up our main show. We're going to move right into our after show with Jonathan. Thank you so much, everyone, for tuning into tonight's Ginger Runner Live. Happy Wednesday. We'll be back next week at a regular weekly time, and we appreciate you all. Get out there, train hard, race harder. I'm part of the hardest. I know I am. We'll see you guys tomorrow.
Goodbye.
Later. See ya. Bye.
Ginger Runner.